stops. The instruments tell you before anyone says a word. For hours, the cable has been slipping steadily over the stern, disappearing into an Atlantic so dark that the lamps cannot find its surface. Mile after mile of copper, gutta percha, and iron has descended behind the ship, carrying with it your money, your reputation, and a promise you have repeated on both sides of the ocean, that a message will soon travel from Europe to America in minutes rather than weeks. Then the needle stops moving. The electricians lean closer. The machinery slows. Somewhere far below you, in water deeper than any mountain you have ever seen, the cable has broken again. Nobody needs to explain what this means. There may not be enough wire left for another attempt. There may not be enough money either. Around you, the deck shifts gently beneath your feet. The engines continue breathing, and the Atlantic closes over the broken end as though your great idea had never existed at all. You stand without speaking. Your name is Cyrus West Field. You are 38 years old, an American businessman who retired before most people have properly begun their careers. 4 years ago, you knew almost nothing about telegraphy. Now you have crossed the Atlantic again and again, argued with governments, borrowed warships, persuaded engineers, exhausted investors, and placed enough cable on the ocean floor to reach across a continent. Much of it is now lying useless beneath you. Before we go any farther, tell me where in the world you are listening from and what time it is there. Tonight, those two details matter more than usual, because this is the story of the wire that changed both distance and time. If you are settling down to sleep, there is nothing here you need to remember. The ships will keep moving without you. The cable will continue descending into the dark, and if you drift away before the message reaches the opposite shore, it will be waiting whenever you return. This is a true story. The expeditions, failures, messages, technical discoveries, and roles of the people involved are drawn from historical records. Where a private conversation was not preserved, a few brief exchanges have been gently reconstructed from the documented situation so that we can remain inside the room, on the deck, and within the story. For now, remain here for one more moment. It is August of 1857. The first attempt to connect two continents has just failed. Men around you are already calculating what has been lost. You are thinking about whether to begin again. A map on the table. The idea enters your life in a room in New York, not on a ship. 3 years earlier, in January of 1854, you are 34 and looking for something useful to do. This is an unusual problem to have. You left school at 15 and went to work in a dry goods store. Later, you entered the paper business with a partner. That company failed, leaving debts you felt personally bound to repay. You started again, built another paper company, worked at a pace that worried the people around you, and succeeded. By your early 30s, you have made enough money to retire. Retirement is pleasant for approximately as long as it takes you to discover that you are not suited to it. You have a wife, Mary, and a growing family. You have a comfortable house. You have the freedom for which other men work their entire lives. Yet freedom without a task begins to feel strangely empty. You read, travel, attend to investments, and wait for the next important thing to announce itself. It arrives through your brother, Matthew. The visitor is Frederick Gisborne, a British engineer with a project that has already defeated him. He has been trying to build a telegraph line across Newfoundland. The plan is sensible enough. News from Europe reaches North America by ship. Those ships might land at Newfoundland. where the news could be sent by wire to New York instead of completing the slower voyage south. But Newfoundland is not an easy place through which to draw a line. The interior is rough, wet, sparsely settled, and expensive to cross. Gisborne's company has failed. He needs money to revive it. You listen while he explains the route. On the table is a globe. You look at Newfoundland. Then your eyes move eastward across the blue curve toward Ireland. The question seems almost embarrassingly simple. If a telegraph line can reach the eastern edge of Newfoundland, why wait for a ship at all? Why not continue the wire beneath the Atlantic and bring Europe itself into the circuit? Gisborne has considered the possibility. Others have imagined it too. Samuel Morse has experimented with underwater telegraphy. Cables have already crossed shorter stretches of water, including the English Channel. But an ocean is not a channel. The distance between Ireland and Newfoundland is measured not in dozens of miles, but in thousands. No cable has been made that long. No ship has carried one. No one knows whether a signal will remain readable after traveling so far through a wire surrounded by salt water. No one knows whether the cable can survive its own weight as it falls from a moving ship toward a seabed miles below. You are not an engineer. You cannot answer any of these questions, but you know how to ask people who can. Gisborne follows your attention toward Ireland. Across the Atlantic, he asks. Across it, you answer. Before the meeting ends, the bankrupt Newfoundland line has become the beginning of something much larger. You will acquire Gisborne's project, finish the route across the island, cross the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and then continue toward Ireland. It sounds almost orderly when placed in a sentence. The ocean on the globe remains perfectly still. The men who might say yes. An idea is weightless. A cable is not. To turn the line on the globe into iron and copper, you need money, ships, factories, government support, and people willing to risk their reputations beside yours. You begin close to home. Your first approach is to Peter Cooper, your neighbor. He is older than you, wealthy, cautious, and respected throughout New York. His name carries the kind of confidence your new proposal does not yet possess. You explain that the telegraph has already changed communication on land. Messages that once traveled with horses and trains now move almost instantly between cities. The Atlantic remains an interruption in that new speed. A ship leaving Liverpool can take 10 days or more to reach New York. During those days, markets move without news. Governments wait. Families know nothing of one another. The cable would not merely be another business. It would change the shape of distance. Cooper does not immediately agree. Sensible men rarely do when asked to put money into the sea. But he sees the public value and eventually offers conditional support if other serious investors join. You are asking men to finance something no one has done, he reminds you. Yes, you reply, but not something no one has begun to understand. That first yes makes the second easier. Moses Taylor listens. Marshall Owen Roberts listens. Chandler White listens. Your brother, David Dudley Field, brings legal skill. Samuel Morse lends the authority of the telegraph's most famous American name. One by one, a small group gathers around the project. At an evening meeting in your home, the maps are opened again. There is no grand crowd, no orchestra, no government ceremony, only a collection of men studying distances, concessions, costs, and one another. They must decide whether the idea is visionary or ridiculous, and those two things can look almost identical before the result is known. You do what will become your central work for the next 12 years. You translate possibility into the next practical step. First Newfoundland, then the Gulf, then the ocean. The men subscribe funds. A company is formed. Peter Cooper becomes its president. You become the person who cannot allow the plan to stand still. This is sometimes mistaken for the same thing as inventing the cable. It is not. You will not discover the electrical laws that govern long underwater wires. You will not design the most sensitive receiving instrument or command the ships that carry the line. Your talent is different. You connect people before you connect continents. An engineer understands insulation. A naval officer understands the seabed. A manufacturer understands iron, copper, and machinery. A politician understands guarantees. An investor understands risk. Each holds one portion of the answer, and very few will remain in the same room unless someone keeps bringing them back. That someone is you. In the beginning, confidence comes easily. The first money is raised. The Newfoundland concession is secured. Letters cross the Atlantic, describing support that does not yet exist, and progress that has not yet been made. At home, Mary watches the new enterprise absorb the quiet retirement you had promised your family. There will be dinners interrupted by visitors, departures arranged with little warning, and letters written from ships and hotels. You will cross the ocean so often that traveling between New York and London begins to resemble a commute performed at the speed of a 19th century steamer. You do not yet know this. For now, the company has a plan. The plan has a map, and the map has a line. Only the land, the Gulf, and the Atlantic stand in its way. 70 miles of warning. The first cable you attempt to lay is not across the Atlantic. It is across the Gulf of St. Lawrence, between Cape Ray in Newfoundland and Cape North on Cape Breton Island. The distance is roughly 70 miles. Compared with the Atlantic, it appears almost modest. In 1855, the cable is loaded aboard a small vessel, and the attempt begins. The Gulf teaches you what maps conceal. A line drawn across blue paper has no weight. A real cable pulls backward. Wind shifts the ship. Currents carry the line away from its intended route. Every mile paid out reduces the supply on deck, while increasing the mass hanging between ship and seabed. Bad weather rises. The vessel struggles. To save the ship, the cable is cut. The first substantial object created by your new enterprise disappears into the water without reaching the opposite shore. It would be reasonable to interpret this as a warning. If 70 miles cannot be crossed, the Atlantic proposal has no business existing. You interpret it differently. The failed attempt has revealed specific problems. The next cable can be stronger. The equipment can be improved. A more suitable ship can be used. Failure has provided instructions, although they are expensive instructions, and arrive without any guarantee that the next lesson will be kinder. In 1856, you try again. This time, the cable crosses the Gulf. The Newfoundland line is still far from simple. Hundreds of miles must be built through difficult country. Roads and paths have to be cut. Materials must be transported through places where transport itself is a problem. Yet, piece by piece, the route becomes real. The success across the Gulf matters for another reason. It gives you something to show in Britain. American money alone will not carry the project across the Atlantic. Much of the world's submarine cable experience, manufacturing skill, and available investment is in Britain. You travel there to recruit it. In London, you meet men who have spent years working with electricity and the sea. John Watkins. Brett has already helped connect Britain and France. Charles Bright understands telegraph engineering. Glass, Elliott and Company manufacture submarine cables. George Parker Bidder and Robert Stevenson study large engineering problems. Michael Faraday has explored the strange behavior of electricity. William Thomson, a young professor from Glasgow, is beginning to think carefully about what happens to signals inside very long wires. You also meet Isambard Kingdom Brunel. At Blackwall on the Thames, Brunel shows you an unfinished ship, so large that it seems less constructed than assembled into the landscape. The hull belongs to the Great Eastern, intended to carry passengers to distant parts of the world without stopping for coal. Brunel points toward it and observes that this is the ship to lay the Atlantic cable. At the time, the remark feels premature. The Great Eastern is not complete, and your company does not possess a cable ready to cross an ocean. You remember it anyway. The current that refuses to hurry. The central technical problem does not look dramatic. It looks like a signal arriving late. On land, telegraph wires are suspended in air. Glass insulators help prevent the current from escaping through poles into the ground. Underwater, the conductor must be completely enclosed. The Atlantic cable is designed with a copper core, wrapped in an insulating material called gutta percha, and protected by iron wires. Gutta percha comes from trees in Southeast Asia, warmed and shaped around the copper. It becomes a tough, water-resistant covering. Without it, electricity would leak into the sea long before reaching the opposite continent. But successful insulation creates another difficulty. A long underwater cable behaves partly like an enormous electrical reservoir. The conductor and surrounding sea are separated by insulation. When a pulse enters the wire, the cable does not pass it forward as neatly as a rigid object transmits a push. It stores and releases electrical charge along its length. The pulse spreads. Sharp beginnings become gradual rises. Closely spaced signals blur into one another. The cable remembers the electricity for a little too long. Wildman Whitehouse, the company's electrician, believed strong electrical force and practical adjustment can overcome the problem. William Thomson argues from mathematical theory that signaling must be gentler and slower, and that sensitive instruments are needed to detect the weakened current at the far end. The pulse must be made stronger. Whitehouse insists during the continuing debate. Thomson's answer is quieter. The current is already arriving. The real challenge is learning to hear it. Their disagreement is not merely academic. It affects the cable's construction, the sending equipment, the receiving instruments, the expected speed, and eventually the survival of the first working line. You stand between experts whose language can turn a simple question into a field of invisible forces. Can the signal cross? The answer appears to be yes, but not in the way land telegraph operators expect. Electricity will reach the other side. The difficulty is separating one symbol from the next and reading a pulse that has been stretched by 2,000 miles of cable. Thomson develops a mirror galvanometer. A tiny mirror is attached to a magnet and suspended inside a coil. When a faint current arrives, the magnet turns slightly. A beam of light reflected from the mirror moves across a scale. The electricity may be weak, but the light makes its movement visible. The machine does not produce the satisfying clack of a telegraph sounder. It creates a small, wandering point of brightness. An operator watches the light move one way or the other and translates those movements into letters. This becomes one of the quiet images of the entire enterprise. A room of men watching a speck of light, trying to determine whether Europe is speaking. Outside those rooms, the public imagines messages flashing beneath the ocean like lightning. Inside, progress is slower. Signals hesitate. Engineers disagree. Tests are repeated. Money disappears into factories where hundreds of miles of cable are being made in separate sections. You do not need to settle every scientific argument yourself. You need to keep the company alive long enough for the correct answers to reveal themselves. By the end of 1856, the Atlantic Telegraph Company has been formed in Britain. The British government offers support, including the use of ships and an annual payment if the cable works. The United States government is more difficult. The proposal encounters political objections, competing interests, and suspicion over why public resources should support a private company whose endpoints lie in British territory. You travel to Washington, you wait, you explain, you return. The bill passes narrowly, is reconsidered, survives, and finally receives approval. The governments will provide ships. The factories will provide cable. The engineers will provide machinery and instruments. The ocean will provide the test. A language made of light. Before the cable can carry anyone's words, people must agree on what a word will look like after crossing an ocean. In an ordinary telegraph office, an operator presses a key. The circuit opens and closes. At the receiving end, an electromagnet moves. The pattern can be heard as clicks or marked onto paper. Short and long signals become letters. Letters become language. The Atlantic cable refuses to behave so neatly. During demonstrations, you watch pulses enter a long, submerged conductor and arrive at the other end, softened and delayed. If the operator sends too rapidly, one pulse overlaps the next. The distinction between short and long becomes uncertain. A sentence dissolves into electrical weather. White House approaches the cable like a practical obstacle. More force should produce a stronger result. Thompson approaches it like a system whose limits must be understood. If a faint signal arrives intact, the receiving instrument should become more sensitive rather than the transmitter becoming more violent. The disagreement changes the mood of meetings. These are not men arguing over decoration. One method may be slow but safe. Another promises speed at the risk of damaging insulation. The company wants a cable that works, but investors also want it to carry enough messages to earn money. You cannot settle the mathematics. You can, however, watch the instruments. Thomson's mirror galvanometer seems almost too delicate for the scale of the enterprise. The cable weighs thousands of tons. Warships carry it. Factories manufacture it by the mile. Governments debate it. Yet, at the end of all that mass is a mirror so small that a weak current can turn it. A lamp directs light toward the mirror. The reflection falls onto a scale. When current passes one way, the spot moves left. When it passes the other, the spot moves right. An operator sits before the shifting beam and reads intention from motion. There is something encouraging in this. The solution is not always to shout across a greater distance. Sometimes it is to become better at listening. You begin to understand that the Atlantic line will not be one invention. It will be a chain of inventions whose weaknesses must fit together without becoming fatal. Copper must conduct. Gutta percha must insulate. Iron must protect. The paying out machine must release the line. The ship must hold its course. The sender must shape the pulse. The receiver must detect what remains. And the business must survive while every link is improved. When you speak to investors, you describe a cable. What you are really asking them to finance is an entire language made of metal, electricity, machinery, and light. Iron in the water. In the summer of 1857, the cable is divided between two naval ships. The United States provides the Niagara, an immense steam frigate. Britain provides the Agamemnon, a warship that once carried guns and now carries coiled wire. Neither can hold the full length, so the plan is to begin at Valentia Island on the west coast of Ireland. The Niagara will pay out the first half. In mid-ocean, its cable will be spliced to the section aboard the Agamemnon, which will continue toward Newfoundland. The cable fills tanks inside the ships. Sailors have spent weeks guiding it into vast circular coils. It rests layer upon layer, apparently calm, though everyone knows one buried kink could rise at the wrong moment and end the expedition. At Valentia, speeches are given and prayers are said. The shore end is carried from the ship. Boats crowd the water. Spectators watch as the first portion is brought to land. There is a natural temptation to treat departure as achievement. The cable is visible. The ships are impressive. Governments are represented. Newspapers are watching. For a few hours, success seems to possess its own momentum. Then the coast begins to recede. Your part is aboard the Niagara. Behind you, the cable passes through the machinery and over the stern. The ship must move forward, while letting the line descend with enough slack to follow the seabed. Too little cable, and it hangs across valleys or snaps under its own weight. Too much, and the limited supply will be exhausted before Newfoundland. Speed, depth, strain, and distance must remain in balance. At first, the cable runs too freely. The brake on the paying out machinery is applied. The strain increases. Men watch the dynamometer as though it were a pulse. The sea deepens. More cable hangs unsupported behind the ship. A small change at the brake becomes enormous, thousands of feet below. On the 11th of August, after several hundred miles have been paid out, the strain rises. The machinery grips. The ship continues moving. The cable parts and vanishes. For a moment, the scene is almost too simple. There is no explosion. No great coil leaps from the tank. A line that filled factories, contracts, newspapers, and years of work passes over the stern and is gone. The first Atlantic expedition has ended within a few days of leaving Ireland. More than 300 miles of cable lie on the seabed. The remaining supply is insufficient to continue. The ships return. Public confidence changes faster than ocean weather. Before departure, the enterprise was a marvel. After failure, it becomes an expensive fantasy. Investors, who once wanted to be associated with the future, now remember that the future has asked them for more money. You return to America and discover that the financial panic of 1857 has damaged the fortune you built in paper. Loss waits on both sides of the Atlantic. Mary receives a husband who has come home, but has not returned. Your attention is already on new machinery, replacement cable, government ships, and the next season. The lesson from the Gulf repeats itself. The cable did not fail because the ocean cannot be crossed. It failed because the method was not yet good enough. This belief is either perseverance or self-deception. There is only one way to learn which. 3. Broken beginnings. For 1858, the plan changes. Instead of beginning at Ireland and transferring the cable between ships in mid-ocean, the Niagara and Agamemnon will meet in the middle, splice their sections together, and sail in opposite directions. The Niagara will head west toward Newfoundland. The Agamemnon will head east toward Ireland. This divides the risk. It also means that, once the ships separate, Each must continue without seeing the other. Electrical signals sent through the joined cable will be the only proof that the connection still exists. The fleet leaves Plymouth in June. Before a single mile is laid, the Atlantic nearly ends the expedition. A violent storm catches the ships. The Agamemnon, burdened high with cable, rolls so heavily that furniture, equipment, and men are thrown across its interior. Waves strike the decks. For days, the fleet is scattered. The ships must find one another again in the open ocean. When at last the splice is made, the two halves are joined across the decks. The cable enters the sea. The ships move apart. Only a few miles have been paid out when the line breaks. They return, meet again, and make another splice. This time, the cable lasts longer. The ships separate beyond sight. In the electrical room, instruments show signals passing from one vessel to the other through the wire trailing between them and the sea. Then the signals stop. The cable has broken again. A third attempt begins. Again, the ships meet. Again, men haul the ends into position, expose the copper, join the conductor, rebuild the insulation, bind the armor, and lower the repaired section overboard. The ritual has become familiar enough to be frightening. This third beginning carries the cable farther. The sea beneath the ships is miles deep. Hundreds of miles of line pass into it. Every hour extends the distance between the vessels and reduces the amount remaining in the tanks. Then continuity disappears. For the third time, the Atlantic holds the cable and gives back silence. The ships return to Ireland with their supplies reduced and their crews exhausted. The directors meet in London. There is enough cable for one more attempt, but little enthusiasm. The season is advancing. The ships have already suffered. The company has lost money and credibility. Continuing may turn a difficult failure into a complete one. You listen while the reasons to stop accumulate. Each reason is sensible. You argue that the last attempt has also proved something. The cable travelled hundreds of miles through deep water. Signals passed between the ships. The machinery performed better than it had the previous year. The breaks were disasters, but they were not evidence of impossibility. The company has one remaining chance already paid for and sitting aboard the ships. One of the directors observes that enough cable remains for only a single trial. Then we have one trial. You answer. Eventually, the directors agree. The fleet will sail once more. There is no large public celebration this time. Failure has removed the spectators. The people who remain are those required to do the work. On the 29th of July, in the middle of the Atlantic, the cable ends are joined for the fourth time that summer. The Niagara turns west. The Agamemnon turns east. Between them, the new line sinks out of sight. Two shores listening. The fourth attempt does not feel different at first. The same cable moves through the same machinery. The same gauges rise and fall. The same men examine every turn of wire as it comes from the tank. The Atlantic has not become smaller because the directors agreed to one more voyage. On the Niagara, you learn to measure hope in intervals. The electrical signal is still present. Another hour passes. The signal remains. At night, the ship becomes a moving island of lamps. Men change watches. The cable continues sliding over the stern with a low mechanical rhythm. Behind you lies a line no one can see, descending through cold water toward plains and ridges that no human eye has visited. In the electrical room, operators exchange test signals with the Agamemnon. The other ship is now hundreds of miles away, hidden beyond the curve of the earth. Yet a movement of the instrument proves that it still exists at the far end of the wire. This is the invention before the invention is complete. Two ships already speaking through the ocean, while traveling away from one another. A whale approaches the cable near the Agamemnon. For a few moments, the enormous animal appears likely to cross the line where it enters the water. It passes close enough to make everyone imagine the absurdity of losing the Enterprise to a whale. The cable survives. Damaged sections appear in the coils and must be repaired before they reach the stern. Men work with only minutes available, wrapping and binding while the ship continues forward. At one point, electrical continuity is lost, even though the insulation remains sound. The cable is cut on deck, the conductor repaired, and the ends joined again while miles of the line already hang in the sea. The signal returns. Day after day, the tanks empty. You are heading for Trinity Bay in Newfoundland. The Agamemnon is heading for Valentia. Neither side knows with certainty what awaits at the other shore. A fault might still be developing somewhere behind you. The remaining cable might be insufficient. Weather might rise at the final approach. The line could survive the entire ocean and fail within sight of land. On the night of August 4th, the Niagara enters Trinity Bay. The water is sheltered here. Dark hills surround the inlet. The telegraph fleet has arrived so quietly that the people ashore are asleep. At 2 in the morning, you go ashore in a small boat. The telegraph house stands about half a mile from the landing. You wake the people responsible for it and tell them the fleet has arrived. This may be one of the strangest announcements ever delivered before dawn. Europe might already be attached to the cable behind your boat. The shore end is landed. It is carried into the station. Connections are made. Then a strong electrical current arrives through the entire line from Ireland. The Agamemnon has reached Valentia. The cable is complete. Captain Hudson gathers those present and reads prayers. Later, guns fire a salute across the bay. The sound rolls against the hills, but the true announcement is moving silently through copper beneath the Atlantic. Europe and North America are connected. You have succeeded. At least, that is what success looks like on the morning of August 5th, 1858. The city of fireworks news moves outward from Newfoundland along the landlines. For years, you have described what the cable might do. Now, reports of its completion travel at telegraphic speed. Newspapers print the announcement. Bells ring. Flags appear. Ships dress themselves in color. Cities begin planning celebrations before the cable has carried ordinary business for a single day. The public does not celebrate cautiously. The Atlantic has been treated as one of the permanent boundaries of human life. Ships cross it, but they cannot eliminate the waiting. A European government makes a decision, and America learns of it days later. Prices in London change, while merchants in New York continue trading against old information. A letter about illness, birth, or death remains trapped aboard a vessel, while the people who need it most go on without knowing. Now the delay appears to have collapsed. The first official company message is brief. Europe and America are united by telegraphic communication. Queen Victoria sends a message to President James Buchanan. The transmission is painfully slow, the letters emerging through the stretched and weakened signals of the cable. Operators work for hours to receive and confirm the words. Yet the very slowness makes the achievement feel more astonishing. A sentence is crossing an ocean without a ship, the president replies. In New York, crowds fill the streets. Buildings are illuminated. A torchlight procession moves through the city. Fireworks rise above City Hall. The celebration becomes so elaborate that a fire breaks out in the building, an almost perfect symbol of the moment. Public excitement burning faster than the new technology can safely carry it. You are honored at banquets and introduced to audiences as the man who joined the continent. The same people who recently regarded the cable as a fantasy now speak as if its success had always been inevitable. For a little while, you allow yourself to believe them. At home, the years of absence and financial risk appear justified. Mary and the children can see the result of all those departures. Your investors have not placed their money at the bottom of the sea after all. Your name is associated with an achievement compared to the greatest voyages and engineering works of the age. But the operators at Valentia and Newfoundland are not celebrating. They are trying to keep the signal alive. The cable has worked, but it has not become healthy simply because crowds have cheered it. Its insulation was damaged during manufacture, storage, and laying. The two halves were made with armor, twisted in opposite directions. The long submerged conductor distorts pulses more severely than many expected. Signals arrive weak and blurred. William Thompson's sensitive instruments can detect currents that stronger, less delicate equipment struggles to read. Wildman Whitehouse believes greater voltage will force clearer signals through. The cable is subjected to powerful electrical discharges. For the public, electricity is the solution. Inside the cable, it is also a source of stress. High voltage attacks insulation already carrying hidden injuries. The signal becomes less dependable. Messages slow. Words require repetition. The bright future beneath the Atlantic begins to flicker. After the applause, you receive the warnings at first as technical difficulties. New systems misbehave. Operators learn. Instruments are adjusted. Faults can be located and perhaps repaired. The cable exists. Surely, that is the hardest part. Then the interruptions lengthen. The current weakens. By October, the line is silent. The cable that changed the world has worked for only a few weeks. There is no second celebration to reverse the first. No procession marks the moment when the last readable pulse fails to arrive. The achievement simply stops answering. Public admiration turns into suspicion. Some claim the cable never truly worked. Others suggest that the entire enterprise was exaggerated to raise money or manipulate shares. The difficulty of explaining capacitance, damaged insulation, and signal distortion leaves space for simpler stories about fraud and incompetence. You possess proof that messages crossed. Governments used the light. Operators kept records. But the dead cable lies where no one can inspect it, and a silent object offers little defense. This failure is worse than the broken cables of 1857 and early 1858. Those attempts failed before victory. This one allowed you to stand inside success, invite the world to celebrate, and then took it away. You begin trying to revive the company. Money is the immediate problem, but confidence is the deeper one. Investors remember the broken line. Engineers continue arguing about responsibility. Government support becomes harder to obtain. A cable project in the Red Sea also fails, spreading doubt about long submarine telegraphs generally. Then history creates a different interruption. The United States moves towards civil war. By 1861, the country that supplied one of the original cable ships is fighting itself. Ships, money, political attention, and industrial effort are required elsewhere. A new Atlantic expedition becomes impossible to organize. For years, Your great project exists mostly in meetings, reports, experiments, and letters. This is the least cinematic part of persistence. There is no storming deck and no cable racing over the stern. There are journeys to offices where men politely decline. There are scientific committees. There are new submarine lines laid elsewhere, each one providing evidence that the technology is improving. There are evenings when the Atlantic cable appears to belong to an earlier version of your life. Your children grow older. The world changes. The telegraph spreads farther across land. In 1861, a line reaches across the United States, linking the eastern network to California. The continent is connected from coast to coast, while the ocean remains unbridged. William Thomson continues studying long cables. New instruments are developed. Manufacturers improve insulation and testing. Engineers learn that every inch of a submarine line must be treated as part of one electrical system. A tiny defect hidden inside hundreds of miles cannot be dismissed simply because most of the cable is sound. The failure of 1858 becomes a laboratory stretched across the seabed. You wait for science to turn its lessons into confidence, and then you begin asking for money again. The years without a ship. During the long pause, people occasionally ask whether you still believe in the Atlantic cable. The question is understandable. Belief is all that remains visible. There is no cable ship preparing to sail. No factory is producing 2,000 miles of new line. The original company maintains an office and a collection of obligations, but it no longer possesses the momentum that once drew crowds to the docks. You answer by continuing to travel. Britain appoints a committee to investigate submarine telegraphy. Engineers, physicists, manufacturers, and operators give evidence. The failure of 1858 is examined not as a single catastrophe, but as a collection of decisions: design, materials, storage, laying machinery, signaling voltage, and testing. This matters because blame ends a story while analysis continues it. If the cable failed because the Atlantic is inherently uncrossable, there is nothing to do. If it failed because insulation was damaged, signals misunderstood, and equipment badly matched to the line, then those things can be changed. Elsewhere, longer submarine cables begin to succeed. The Mediterranean and Persian Gulf become proving grounds. Every functioning line weakens the argument that deep water telegraphy is fantasy. Every failed line adds another caution. You correspond with Thomson and other engineers. You speak with manufacturers. You follow new instruments and materials, even when there is no money for an Atlantic attempt. The project becomes a patient accumulation of readiness. At home, the pause does not return the earlier life. Mary has known the cable as a recurring member of the household, demanding, expensive, and always about to require another voyage. Your children have grown up with departures to Britain and Newfoundland. The difference between failure and delay may be important to you, but both leave an empty chair. You cannot promise exactly when another expedition will sail. You can only refuse to call the last one final. The Civil War deepens the separation. Atlantic communication would be enormously valuable during such a crisis. Yet the crisis itself prevents the cable from being built. News and diplomacy cross by ship, while armies move and governments make decisions faster than ships can report them. When the political path narrows, you work the financial one. When money is unavailable, you follow the science. When public attention disappears, you maintain private relationships with the people who will matter when the project returns. Years pass this way. Persistence no longer resembles standing against a storm. It resembles keeping papers in order, answering letters, remembering who once offered support, and being ready when circumstances change. By 1863 and 1864, they begin to change. The scientific investigation has restored credibility. Cable manufacturers have greater experience. William Thomson's understanding of long lines is no longer a warning the company can afford to ignore. John Pender and other British investors see that a properly designed connection could become not merely possible, but valuable. And the Great Eastern, the ship Brunel once pointed out beside the Thames, is waiting for work. The Enterprise has a ship again. The ship that had become a failure. The ship Brunel showed you years earlier is available. The Great Eastern was designed on a scale that seemed to belong to the future. Nearly 700 feet long, driven by both paddle wheels and a screw propeller, it was built to carry thousands of passengers across enormous distances without regularly stopping for coal. Its size made it famous before it made it useful. The ship suffered accidents, financial trouble, and commercial disappointment. Too large for many ports and expensive to operate, it did not transform passenger travel as intended. Brunel died before seeing what would eventually become its most important work. By 1864, the Great Eastern is a magnificent problem in need of a purpose. For the Atlantic cable, its excess becomes an advantage. Earlier expeditions required 2 ships because no single vessel could carry the entire line. The Great Eastern can hold more than 2,000 miles of cable in 3 enormous tanks and still carry the machinery, coal, crew, engineers, and supplies needed for the voyage. It can leave Ireland with one continuous cable and sail all the way to Newfoundland. The vessel that failed at its intended career may succeed at a task for which no ordinary ship is large enough. You recognize something familiar in it. The new cable is stronger and more carefully made. Each section is tested during manufacture. The copper conductor is surrounded by layers of gutta percha and protective material, then armored with iron wires. The finished line is roughly the thickness of a person's thumb, astonishingly small for an object expected to hang through miles of water. As the cable enters the Great Eastern, it descends into tanks like an iron river. Deep below deck, men guide it into circular coils. Layer after layer settles into darkness. The work continues for weeks. Visitors peer into the cavernous holds and see human figures moving at the bottom. Sailors sing while the cable passes through their hands, their voices rising through the ship from around the object, meant to carry other voices beneath the sea. William Thomson joins the expedition. So do engineers and electricians who have spent years refining the design. Captain James Anderson commands the Great Eastern. Robert Halpin serves as chief officer. Samuel Canning oversees cable work. Each person has a specific responsibility, and the project is finally mature enough to respect the difference between them. You remain what you have always been, the person binding the responsibilities together. In July of 1865, the Great Eastern sails from Ireland. This time, there is no second cable ship moving toward the opposite horizon. The line begins at Valentia and passes through the Great Eastern toward Newfoundland. Electrical tests continue from shore through every mile already laid. If a defect appears, the instruments aboard can estimate where it lies. For several days, the operation proceeds smoothly. Then the testing equipment shows a fault. The ship must stop and reverse, carefully hauling the cable back from the sea until the damaged portion reaches the deck. Pulling up is more dangerous than paying out. The cable now bears its own weight from the ship toward the bottom, and the machinery must lift without jerking or crushing it. The fault is recovered and repaired. 6 days later, another appears. Again, the ship turns. Again, the cable is raised. Again, the damaged section is cut out and the conductor joined. Some aboard suspect deliberate damage. Others see manufacturing flaws. Whatever the cause, the effect is the same. Every fault interrupts the voyage and forces the crew to lift an object the Atlantic is already pulling downward. Still, the cable continues. 1,000 miles, then 1,200. More than half the ocean is behind you. Newfoundland is approaching. The new cable has carried test signals reliably across a distance that once destroyed the company's confidence. It begins to feel possible again. That is when the third fault appears. The end that falls away. It is August 2nd, 1865. The fault lies in a section that has already gone overboard. The Great Eastern reverses and begins bringing the cable back. On deck, the recovery machinery takes the strain. The cable rises from water, more than 2 miles deep, carrying not only its own weight, but the motion of the sea and ship. Men watch the dynamometer. The tension climbs. Orders pass along the deck. Engines adjust. The ship tries to remain aligned with a line almost invisible below the surface. Ease the strain, an engineer calls. The order passes toward the machinery, but the movement of a ship and the weight of 2 miles of cable cannot be corrected as quickly as a sentence. Then the machinery loses control. The cable snaps. The broken end whips out of reach and drops into the Atlantic. You have experienced this moment before, but never so close to the far shore, and never after so many miles of perfect signal. More than 1,200 miles of good cable now lie connected to Ireland at one end and lost in deep water at the other. The Great Eastern stops above the position. This time, the expedition has brought grappling equipment. A grapnel is a heavy iron hook, lowered on miles of rope. The ship must drag it across the seabed, catch a cable scarcely thicker than a wrist, and raise that cable through water 2 miles deep. It sounds less like engineering than fishing for a thread in darkness. The position is marked as precisely as navigation allows. The grapnel goes down. Hours pass before it reaches the bottom. The ship begins to drag. At the rope, changes in strain suggest that the hook has found something. The crew starts hauling in. Mile after mile of rope returns wet from the sea. The weight increases. Hope spreads carefully across the deck. Then the rope breaks. The grapnel, rope, and whatever it held fall back. Another attempt begins. Again, the hook descends. Again, the ship traces a path across an unseen seabed. Again, the strain changes. Again, the crew hauls upward. Another rope parts. The Atlantic is not merely deep. It multiplies every weakness. A small flaw in rope becomes failure under tons of suspended weight. A slight error in position becomes miles of empty seabed. Weather shifts the ship while the hook is still descending. The crew continues until grappling supplies, coal, and time run low. At last, Captain Anderson must turn the Great Eastern eastward. The cable remains below. The ship returns to Britain, carrying unused cable and another public failure. On shore, the result is described in the familiar language of loss. But the engineers know the voyage proved several important things. The Great Eastern can lay cable smoothly. The improved line works across more than 1,000 miles. Faults can be detected from aboard. The lost section is still electrically sound from Ireland to the place where it rests on the seabed. The expedition failed near the end, not near the beginning. To an investor, this distinction may sound expensive, To you, it sounds like one more attempt, asking the same men again. There are failures after which everyone agrees to continue. This is not one of them. The Atlantic Telegraph Company has spent its capital. Its shareholders have already supported expeditions in 1857, 1858, and 1865. They have watched one cable break near Ireland, another die after a public triumph, and a third disappear when Newfoundland was almost within reach. The engineering case for another attempt is stronger than ever. The financial case is nearly impossible. You return to the work you began in your drawing room 12 years earlier. You visit offices. You unfold charts. You explain why the latest failure was different from the others. The Great Eastern worked. The cable worked. More than 1,200 miles of the lost line still work. The expedition did not reveal a fundamental impossibility. It revealed the need for stronger grappling rope and enough capital to finish. The reasoning is sound. It does not make the checks arrive. Many original investors cannot or will not contribute more. Some believe the Atlantic will eventually be crossed, but prefer that someone else pay for the next lesson. Others are tired of seeing your name at the door with another improved plan. John Pender becomes essential. Pender is a Manchester businessman whose wealth comes from textiles and whose attention has turned increasingly toward telegraph cables. He has already risked money on the enterprise. Now he helps form a new Anglo-American telegraph company capable of financing another expedition. The arrangement is complicated. There are old shareholders, new subscribers, manufacturers accepting part of their payment in risk, and agreements over who will own which cable if one or both are completed. The future connection between continents is built from contracts almost as intricate as the conductor itself. You put more of your own resources into the effort. At home, this decision cannot feel abstract. Money placed into a cable is money no longer available to the family. Time spent in London is time not spent with Mary and the children. The enterprise has already consumed much of the retirement you once imagined. Yet stopping now would not restore those years. It would only leave the working end of the 1865 cable waiting on the seabed. There is something almost personal about that lost line. Electricians in Ireland can still test it. More than 1,000 miles away, the current reaches the broken western end and returns information about the cable's condition. The object is not dead. It is unfinished. The new plan, therefore, contains two ambitions. First, the Great Eastern will lay a completely new cable from Ireland to Newfoundland. Then it will return to the position marked the previous year, recover the old cable, splice on the remaining length, and create a second working line. One voyage will attempt to turn one failure into two successes. The confidence of this proposal borders on defiance. It is also practical. A second cable would provide additional capacity and security. If one line failed, the other might continue. The abandoned cable represents a large investment already lying in place. Recovering it would prove not only that cables can be laid, but that they can be found and repaired in the deep ocean. The new money is raised. The factories begin again. The Great Eastern opens its tanks. And for the 5th time, the Atlantic cable prepares to leave Ireland. Everything the ocean taught you. The expedition of 1866 carries more than new cable. It carries the memory of every previous failure. The paying out machinery remembers the cable that ran too quickly in 1857. Its brakes and controls have been improved. The electrical room remembers the weak, blurred signals of 1858. Thomson's sensitive instruments and signaling methods are trusted. The manufacturing process remembers faults hidden beneath insulation. The new cable is tested continuously as it is made, stored, loaded, and laid. The grappling equipment remembers the ropes that broke in 1865. The Great Eastern now carries miles of stronger rope, chains, hooks, buoys, and gear, prepared for the weight of the deep sea. Even the ship has been changed by experience. Captain Anderson and Robert Halpin prepare its engines so the enormous vessel can move with surprising precision. Paddle wheels and screw can be controlled to hold position, turn, reverse, and follow the cable. The hull is cleaned of the growth accumulated during years at sea. Coal fills the bunkers. The remaining cable from the previous expedition is examined alongside the new line. Nothing is assumed harmless because it looks small. This is what mature technology often looks like. Not a perfect invention arriving all at once, but an object covered with the invisible corrections of earlier mistakes. On the west coast of Ireland, the shore end is landed at Foilhomerum Bay, near Valentia. The cable house stands ready. Electrical contact with the ship will be maintained from the moment the line begins to leave land. Before departure, those involved gather for a service. 12 years of labour have taught them not to speak of certainty too loudly. The Great Eastern sails in July. You watch Ireland become a dark edge behind the ship. Once again, the cable passes from its tank, through the paying out machinery, and over the stern. Once again, it forms a line between the known world and the deep. But the atmosphere aboard has changed. In 1857, the expedition carried the nervousness of a first performance. In 1858, it carried desperation. In 1865, hope returned alongside fear of another hidden defect. Now the work is almost quiet. The cable runs. The instruments answer. The ship advances. Men still keep constant watch. Every passing mile can contain a fault. Every change in strain matters. But procedure has replaced improvisation. The crew knows what to do if the electrical tests alter, if a coil catches, if the ship drifts, if weather changes, if the line must be recovered. For you, quiet is not the absence of tension. It is evidence of preparation. The longest ordinary days. The Great Eastern moves west at the controlled pace required by the cable. It is capable of greater speed, but speed is not the objective. The line must settle gently onto the contours of the seabed. The ship's progress and the amount of cable paid out are compared constantly. Depth is estimated. Strain is watched. Electrical tests pass through the growing distance to Valentia. The Atlantic is wide enough that repetition becomes its own landscape. Morning light on grey water. Cable passing over rollers. Numbers recorded in logs. Meals taken and cleared. Watches changing. The reflected beam in the electrical room moving in answer to Ireland. At night, the ship proceeds beneath stars, while the cable continues downward beyond every light. The ocean floor is not flat, despite the comforting phrase, telegraphic plateau. It rises and falls across immense distances. The line settles over sediments accumulated through ages no human history can measure. You have spent years making speeches about annihilating distance. Aboard the Great Eastern, distance refuses to be annihilated quickly. It passes 1 mile at a time. This slowness gives the mind room to imagine failure. You have stood in celebrations before. You know that success can be temporary. Even if the Great Eastern reaches heart's content, the cable must continue working tomorrow, and the day after that. It must carry ordinary commercial traffic after the engineers and newspapers leave. The real victory will not be the first message. It will be the thousandth. Perhaps this is why the voyage feels less triumphant than the one in 1858. You no longer need the ocean to produce a miracle. You need it to permit a routine. Days pass without a major fault. The electricians continue testing. Valentia continues answering. The cable remaining in the tanks grows smaller. The distance to Newfoundland contracts. Messages circulate aboard, but nobody declares the work complete. There will be time for certainty on land. On July 27th, the Great Eastern approaches Trinity Bay. The water changes. Land appears. Boats come out. The enormous ship moves toward Heart's Content, a sheltered harbour selected because deep water reaches close to shore. The name seems invented for this exact arrival. People gather along the coast. For them, the Great Eastern is almost beyond scale. A dark, mechanical landscape entering their small harbour. For those aboard, the houses and hills of Newfoundland are proof that the western edge of the ocean has returned. The shore end is landed. Connections are made. The instruments respond. This time, the signal does not need to fight through the wounds of the 1858 cable. The new line carries readable messages with a speed and clarity the earlier operators could only imagine. You send announcements east and west. 12 years after looking from Newfoundland to Ireland on a globe, you have placed a working line between them. The cable remains alive. Heart's Content. The harbour fills with ships, boats, flags, visitors and sound. There are speeches again. There are salutes again. Messages of congratulations arrive from officials, investors, engineers, and people who encountered the project somewhere during its 12-year journey. You have learned to receive applause carefully. In 1858, celebration came before the system had proved itself. Now, every additional message is part of the celebration. Prices, news, greetings, and instructions begin to move through the cable. The connection is not merely demonstrated, it is used. William Thompson's contribution is recognized. The quiet professor, who argued that faint signals should be handled with sensitivity rather than force, has helped give the cable its voice. Charles Bright, Samuel Canning, Captain Anderson, Robert Halpin, John Pender, the manufacturers, sailors, electricians, government officials and investors all belong inside the result. The public still prefers a single name. Your name is useful because it gives the story a human shape. Cyrus Field tried, failed and tried again. Yet you know how many kinds of knowledge had to meet before the line could work. No amount of persistence alone could insulate the copper, control a ship, read a weak current, or lift a cable from the deep. Your contribution was never solitary heroism. It was continuity. When one group lost interest, you found another. When one government delayed, you continued with the other. When engineers disagreed, you kept the enterprise alive long enough for evidence to judge them. When a ship returned without reaching land, you turned the failure into the case for a better ship. You kept the human circuit closed. At Heart's Content, however, even that achievement is not the end. The 1865 cable is still waiting in the middle of the ocean. Most expeditions would accept one transatlantic line as sufficient. The Great Eastern has crossed successfully. The crew is tired. The ship needs coal and supplies. There are thousands of reasons to remain in the harbour, where victory is already secure. But a position has been marked on the charts. An electrical pulse still travels from Valentia through 1,200 miles of abandoned cable to a broken end lying 2 miles below the Atlantic. The unfinished line continues calling it the only way it can. Within days, Support vessels head back toward mid-ocean. The Great Eastern takes on thousands of tons of coal and hundreds of miles of additional cable. Grappling rope is checked. Hooks are prepared. On August 9th, the great ship leaves Heart's Content. This time, you are not going west to find land. You are going east to find a wire. Fishing in 2 miles of darkness. The search area is a point on a chart surrounded by moving water. Navigation in 1866 cannot place the ship above it with modern precision. Position is calculated from the sun, stars, chronometers, course, and speed. Wind and current introduce uncertainty. The cable itself is invisible beneath nearly 2 miles of water. Buoys mark the search ground. Several ships work in coordination. The Great Eastern, Albany, and Medway drag grapnels along different paths, attempting to cross the route of the lost line. The hook takes hours to descend. When it reaches the bottom, the ship begins moving slowly. The grapnel trails across mud and sediment. At the surface, men watch the rope for changes that might mean the iron teeth have found the cable. The first attempts find nothing. The search is repeated. A hook catches, but the cable escapes. Another attempt raises the strain. Then a rope or fitting fails. The weather changes. Buoys are lost or shifted. The ships reposition. New lines are calculated across the search area. The grapnel descends again. By the end of August, it has gone overboard dozens of times. This is perseverance reduced to a physical motion. Lower, drag, feel, haul, fail, and lower again. There is almost nothing to see. No one aboard can watch the hook touch the seabed. The entire operation is inferred through rope. A slight increase in strain may be the cable, a rock, or resistance from the bottom. Every haul requires hours before the answer approaches the surface. On August 31st, the sea is calm. The grapnel goes down once more. Late in the evening, the strain begins to rise. 8 tons, 9, 10. The weight increases as the ship hauls. The pattern is different from empty rope. Something long and heavy has been caught. "We have something," a voice says near the dynamometer. Nobody replies with the word cable. Not yet. Nobody celebrates yet. The first mile of lifting only proves that the hook holds something. The cable must survive the journey upward. As it rises, the angle and strain change. The motion of the ship reaches more directly into the suspended line. A sudden sea could jerk it free. Hour after hour, the crew hauls. The cable comes within 1,000 fathoms of the surface. But the most dangerous portion remains. To reduce the load and secure a better grip, the ships coordinate additional grapples. One vessel catches and breaks the cable farther west, creating a free end. The Great Eastern can then lift with less weight, dragging along the bottom. Night becomes morning. Morning becomes afternoon. The ship remains almost motionless above its invisible prize. Men crowd the bows. Orders are given quietly. 2 sailors are secured with ropes so they can reach the cable when it appears, with boats waiting below in case either man falls. Another night comes. Then, after more than a day of lifting, a dark line rises through the surface. The cable has returned. Men seize it, secure it, and bring it aboard. It is covered with evidence of the seabed, but the object itself is recognizable. Iron armor around the conductor that left the ship more than a year earlier. The end is carried toward the electrical room. The conductor is exposed. Connections are made. A signal is sent eastward through 1,200 miles of cable lying on the ocean floor. Everyone watches the instrument. The answer arrives from Valentia. The line is alive. the second voice. There is no need to manufacture the remaining connection from nothing. The Great Eastern already carries the additional cable required to reach Newfoundland. The recovered end is spliced to the new section. Every layer is rebuilt carefully. Conductor, insulation, protective covering, and armor. The joint must pass through machinery, descend into the sea, and remain reliable for years. Then the cable goes overboard again. The ship turns west. This final passage is shorter than the first, but it carries a peculiar sense of return. Behind the ship lies the cable of 1865, recovered from a place no one could see. Ahead lies Heart's Content, and the cable completed in July. For several days, both eras of the Enterprise coexist. The older line rests on the seabed behind you. The new length passes from the tanks. Signals continue travelling to Ireland. On September 8th, the second cable reaches Newfoundland. 2 working telegraph lines now cross the Atlantic. The result is larger than the original promise. You set out to make communication possible. The recovery has made it more dependable. If one cable requires repair, the other can continue. Traffic can be shared. The connection is no longer a single, fragile experiment. It is infrastructure. That word lacks the romance of a storm or celebration, but it describes the deepest success. Infrastructure becomes part of ordinary expectation. People stop marveling that a message can cross and begin complaining about how long it takes, how much it costs, or whether the reply has arrived. The miraculous becomes useful. News that once waited for steamships now travels beneath them. Governments exchange instructions while ships are still at sea. Merchants learn prices across the Atlantic before those prices are weeks old. Families with access to the telegraph can receive urgent news within a day, rather than after an ocean voyage. The cable does not make communication instant in the modern sense. Messages must be written, handed to clerks, encoded, transmitted, received, copied, and delivered. Capacity is limited, and prices are high. But the long enforced silence between continents has been broken. The ships continue sailing above the cable. Storms continue crossing the North Atlantic. Distance remains real for people and cargo. Only information has learned a new route. Before the ship arrives, the change becomes clearest when the first steamer enters port, carrying news that is no longer new. For centuries, the arrival of a ship gave the harbour its knowledge of the distant shore. People watched for sails. Merchants waited for letters and newspapers. Families counted the days since a vessel's departure and imagined the weather between. Now the ship arrives after its information. The prices in its commercial papers have already crossed by cable. Political developments discussed in its newspapers have already been printed in America. Instructions sent after the vessel departed may be waiting for its captain when he comes ashore. The passengers have spent days travelling with news that passed beneath them. In a telegraph office, the new speed does not look dramatic. A clerk accepts a message. An operator sits at an instrument. Words are counted because each one has a cost. The text is sent over land to Newfoundland, carried through the Atlantic cable to Ireland, and forwarded again through the British network. At every stage, a person receives, checks, and passes it onward. The system is fast compared with a ship, but it still has a human rhythm. Paper moves across desks. Keys are pressed. Light shifts on a scale. Ink forms letters. A messenger carries the final copy through streets that remain crowded with horses and carriages. The future has not replaced the old world. It has threaded itself through it. time itself becomes commercially uneven. A merchant with access to the cable can act on information unavailable to someone waiting for the mail. Governments can respond within hours. Newspapers compete to receive dispatches. The expense of transmission keeps many private conversations on paper, but urgent words acquire a new path. The first cables, therefore, do not make the Atlantic irrelevant. They change what it means to wait. A traveller still waits for weather. Cargo still waits for a ship. A letter may still cross slowly, because sending it by telegraph costs too much. But a government no longer has to remain silent, simply because the ocean lies between capitals. A market does not have to trade for 10 days without knowing what happened on the other side. A family with urgent reason and sufficient money can send a few precious words ahead of the next steamer. The cable gives priority to information before the language of networks and bandwidth exists. And each time a message arrives before the ship, your old line on the globe becomes real again. What success keeps honours follow. William Thomson is knighted for his scientific contribution. Charles Bright also receives recognition. Banquets and public ceremonies celebrate the work. On both sides of the ocean, pieces of cable become souvenirs, mounted and displayed as fragments of the wire that join the world. Your own name becomes permanently attached to the enterprise. This is satisfying, but history tends to polish persistence after it succeeds. The 12 years become a clean sequence of determined efforts. The uncertainties disappear. The decision to continue looks obvious because the ending is known. It was never obvious while you were inside it. After the 1857 break, the evidence supported stopping. After the 1858 cable died, the evidence supported stopping. During the years when war and failed cables destroyed confidence, waiting for a better opportunity might easily have become permanent abandonment. After the loss of 1865, even sympathetic investors could reasonably decide that enough money had entered the ocean. Persistence is often described as refusing to listen to failure. Your story suggests something more useful. You listened closely. Each failure changed the next attempt. The Gulf cable was replaced with a stronger one. The 1857 paying out machinery was improved. The electrical mistakes of 1858 led to better theory, testing, insulation, and instruments. The two-ship method gave way to the Great Eastern. The broken grappling ropes of 1865 returned as stronger equipment in 1866. Repeating the same attempt would not have been courage. The achievement came from keeping the objective while changing almost everything used to reach it. There is another lesson in the people around you. The cable succeeds because no single person can build it. The promoter needs the physicist. The physicist needs the instrument maker. The manufacturer needs the sailor. The sailor needs the navigator. The company needs governments. Governments need proof that the private risk is credible. The entire undertaking is a chain, and every link is made from a different kind of skill. For 12 years, you serve as the joint between them. Perhaps that is why a cable appealed to you before you understood its science. Its purpose was connection. So was yours. The wire goes quietly. On it is night again over the Atlantic. Far above the cable, a ship moves west. Its passengers eat, read, talk, and sleep without seeing the line beneath them. The vessel will need days to reach the opposite shore. Below, a telegraph operator in Ireland closes a key. An electrical pulse enters the copper. It does not flash through the water like visible lightning. It moves within the conductor, shaped by resistance and capacitance, softened by distance, guided by the engineering learned through years of failure. At Newfoundland, an instrument responds. A point of light moves. An operator reads it. The ocean has not disappeared. It remains cold, deep, and almost entirely dark. The cable does not defeat it by becoming stronger than the sea. It succeeds by resting quietly on the bottom, protected by iron, insulated from the water, carrying one controlled signal after another. In New York, London, and the small stations between them, the messages continue their journeys over land. Most will not be historic. They will concern prices, arrivals, instructions, weather, business, and private news. That ordinariness is the fulfillment of the idea you saw on the globe. The cable no longer needs a crowd to prove that it works. It only needs the next message. Tonight, the place where you are listening and the time shown on your clock are joined to the rest of the world by systems far faster and more complex than anything Cyrus Field imagined. Much of that connection still travels through cables beneath oceans. The materials have changed. Electrical pulses have given way largely to light. A single modern cable can carry more information in moments than the Atlantic telegraph could carry in years. But the route remains familiar. Land, shore, deep water, another shore. And somewhere in the history beneath that modern network is a failed paper merchant who repaid his debts, retired too young, looked from Newfoundland to Ireland on a globe, and decided that silence was a problem with an engineering solution. For 12 years, the Atlantic answered him with broken cable. Then, at last, it carried his message. There is nothing more you need to hold on to tonight. The grappling ropes are secured. The machinery is still. The Great Eastern rests in the harbour. And beneath the dark water, the wire goes quietly on. Good night,